Hi everyone, and welcome to this meeting regarding telecommunications infrastructure in the community. I'm Anka Crosby, Chair of Safe EMF Education Network, and we refer ourselves to as SEEN. Everyone's busy, so I appreciate seeing so many people on the call today. We're expecting over 60 at last count, and we've actually received a lot of interest across Australia. So I would like to begin by reading this out. Acknowledging the traditional custodians of Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past, present and future, and extend that respect to all. Just a few housekeeping items, just to get them out the way. So just to let you know that this meeting will be recorded and shared with all attendees and elected members that could not attend today. If you could please mute your mics during the presentation, this will reduce the background noise and improve quality of the recording. And finally, to improve your bandwidth, you might consider turning your video off. Thanks everyone. So I would like to provide you with a brief overview before I invite Ray on of SEEN, who SEEN is, and the purpose of the meeting today. So who and what is SEEN? We're probably a very young organisation. We are a non-for-profit organisation based here in Adelaide. It's a beautiful day here today, and we actually are fully run by volunteers. We saw the need to establish a hub, if you will, for the community to promote awareness, education via our website, hold community meetings and events. We also provide solutions to mitigate risks associated with the exposure of electromagnetic radiation, also known as electromagnetic energy in the industry, which is associated with telecommunications towers and other wireless technologies. This includes other forms of man-made electrosmog on the electromagnetic spectrum. SEEN is run by a great committee of professionals. Our membership base is actually really growing, which is fantastic to see. And we now have members in South Australia, New South Wales and Queensland. So just a little bit about myself. I am a business owner and a natural therapist. I have a background in government management and ICT strategic procurement. So how did I get involved in all this? Well, it sort of started a few years ago where I recognised how modern wireless gadgets were affecting my clients' health, especially children, and learning, anxiety, that sort of thing. So I took a deep dive into learning more about the health effects. So since my time with SEEN, I have met many people who suffer from electrosensitivities. For some, this has actually become a modern disability. And sadly, I've also heard of people that have become homeless, and I know a couple of them, as they need to escape the urban areas that are now riddled with antennae. As you may know, in our world, there are many sources of man-made electromagnetic energy, and this is increasing every day. And we are all actually being affected to some degree. You may not feel it, but you are being affected by it on a cellular level. As an elected member, you may have already been approached by people in your community and you're wondering, scratching your head, wondering why, oh, what's going on? So these people come to you with a genuine concerns about the current rollout of the 5G network, and perhaps other matters. So we have invited Ray Broomhall here today to present to you as elected members, so you can all take a part in this role as well, because you guys are also part of the local community. I think we all have a common goal to keep our environment safe. And one of SEEN's goals is to open up discussions with local councils, so we encourage this to support our members. We are grateful to have Ray here today. He brings a wealth of knowledge, a deep understanding and experience in this field. Ray will explain what elected members need to know about the rollout of telecommunications infrastructure in your local community in respect to public health and the law. Ray's presentation will go for around about an hour, and today you will learn things about things like, you know, who are the key players, what is the current state of play, is this a federal, state or council issue? What information does an elected member need to know? How you can support your constituents? What role can local councils play in ensuring an EMF safe community? And I'm sure much more. So during the meeting, if you have a question, please type it into the chat. That works really well in large online Zoom meetings. So Ray can address those questions as we go along. We have also allocated 30 minutes for Q&A following the presentation for any further questions and discussion. So we'll aim to finish the meeting around 4:30 p.m, 4:45 at the latest, that's Adelaide time. And then at the end of the meeting, Shay Ellis, Scene Secretary and Public Relations, will talk about the next steps and close the meeting for us. I would now like to introduce Ray Broomhall. If I may, Ray, if I can just read out your bio, if that's okay. All right. So Raymond Broomhall is a barrister at law and specialises in extremely complex matters and has repute for his lateral thinking and for finding solutions outside of the square. He revels in working on matters that have been placed in the too hard basket by other legal practitioners. He is in high demand throughout the world for his work on electromagnetic radiation issues and is considered to be one of the leading advocates in his field. He has an extensive law library and a large collection of early colonial law, which assists him greatly in widening his knowledge of the common law. Ray has appeared in the High Court, including all Commonwealth courts, inclusive of full federal court and the family court. He has appeared in all Tasmanian courts and various South Australian, New South Wales and Queensland courts, and has provided advice in all jurisdictions. Welcome, Ray. You have the floor now. Unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga, and thank you very much for that. And it's a real honour and a privilege to give a presentation today. And thank you for the invite. And thank you to everyone for joining. And I hope that you'll get a lot of information will come across your way very shortly. A lot of it could be quite overwhelming. And so what I'm going to do is most of it's going to be on a slide presentation, so at least you'll be able to follow and see where I'm coming from as we go through. So I guess the first thing is I'll just have to give you a quick disclaimer, if I may, is that what I'm about to say and my presentation is not, just make sure and you understand that it's not actually medical advice. I'm not a medical practitioner. If you are concerned about health effects, do see a medical practitioner. The other thing is I'm not actually technically giving you legal advice today. I'm just explaining the law as I see it. If you are concerned about the law and you wish to have a look at how it is applied, etc., then I suggest that you go and see a legal practitioner for that. So how do we break this up? So I guess the first way I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the successes I've had with my clients, and you'll see that a lot of them, most of my work has been working with councils around the country and educating councils and getting their understanding as to what their powers are in regards to develop, what we call high impact and low impact developments, etc., and how most of my work operates out of the development sphere. It basically goes around and circumvents that, and it goes more into criminal and civil liability, which is what I'm going to talk about. For you to get a real good understanding about 5G, there's a lot of confusion out there, and I'd just like to explain how I see 5G and how it's presented in my advices and how the 5G issue really concerns you, and it's going to be hopefully a very eye-opening expose of what's really going on out there for you. We're then going into the facts only. I deal only with facts. I don't use any conspiracy theory stuff. It's basically going straight to the jugular, and I use main authorities such as the World Health Organization, PANSA, etc., to explain where this is coming from, and the law, obviously. We talk about criminal, we'll then go into criminal and civil liability. So to get all that out of the way, first we go into criminal, then go into criminal and civil liability, and then the remedies that are available, and notices, etc., that my clients and others have been distributing around the country. So we'll talk about those as we go along. So I'll start, if I may, with sharing my screen, and just got to remember to do this. Here we go. And what I'll do, just bear with me. Where are we? Can you all see that? Anka, can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as you have been told, I'll just explain who I am. I'm a barrister at law at Michael Kirby Chambers. This is my chambers here in Hobart, in Tasmania. And you'll see the other barristers that work with me. Greg Malik, AO, SC, also assists me in a lot of my cases. So does Dr. Nigel Davidson in regards to human rights law, in regards to electromagnetic radiation. And I believe Cal Pearson is with us today as a barrister, and he also assists as well. This is a little bit about some of my work. We've already explained it. So if you want to look at it, you can just go and check out the Michael Kirby's website, and you'll see where I am. And you'll see the areas of law that I operate in, constitutional law, appellate law. I really am strong in those two areas, particularly appellate and constitutional law, criminal law, succession. It goes right down. And then we get into the main one, which I deal with, which I seem to specialise the most in this country, would be electromagnetic radiation law. Right, so I'll now explain some of the work that I've been doing. Most of the work that you see I'm about to show probably in the last couple of years, three to 2 years ago, right up to date, so you'll understand what's been happening. This is an issue here that you probably see it every now and then. Bits and pieces come up in the media. This one here was a council backed the residents against the Telstra installation, and this was in regards to in the Sutherland Shire in New South Wales, and it was basically 3 suburbs in the Shire. One was Liable, Karilla, and Engadine, and this was a low impact 5G small cell issue. Even though they're 4G technically antennae, they were still part of the 5G network rollout. So in essence, the council did a similar thing here. They listened to what I had to say. We met with the councillors at Sutherland Shire with my clients, and they were very impressed, I believe, and that's when they put a motion against Telstra. In the end, a letter was sent out on behalf of the Sutherland Shire Council to Telstra, asking them to put the small cell somewhere else. And you'll see here that in this case, it was a company called Metasite who were actually acting as agent for Telstra at the time. And this was a letter sent by the CEO of the council. Just bear with me for a moment. And there's another one. This is basically for each suburb. This one's for Engadine, and this one was for Karilla. You'll see here, Telstra then announced, we met with Prime Minister Morrison in his office. I wasn't allowed to go, but my client was allowed to go. And I sent some experts with my client. And out of that, he also put pressure on Telstra. And the issue was that Telstra then decided to look for alternative sites. So that was a win on that ground. The other one is Wilson's Creek. You've probably all heard of the Byron Shire issue in Mullumbimby. Well, that was one of the first towers that I stopped. This was again educating the council laws, making the council realise that they do have the power to intervene. and to convince the Telstra, in this case it was Telstra again, to not go ahead with the tower. This is where I attended Mullumbimby. There was a group that was formed called ECSFR, which is known as the Environment and Community Safe from Radiation Association. They got together, invited me on a number of occasions to actually speak to the public. There were three main key players in Australia that as a team, we worked together with our specialist fields. There's myself, Dr. Russell Cooper, who you can see in the middle. He's very, very important doctor. He's probably the most leading EMR EHS specialist in this country. And the other gentleman is a guy called Victor Leach from ORSA. And Victor Leach is a radiation physicist, and he used to work for PANS, I think, for about 20 years, I think, from memory. So he's so we've got a really good team. You can see here the Wilsons Creek Tower was rejected by the council, and so the council knocked back a development application based on health grounds, etc. So that was a good win, that one. And there's more about the Wilsons Creek Tower rejected. There's another one which is in Currumbin in the Gold Coast. There was the Eco Village, a group set up an association called Unplugged, and I was engaged to assist them on that ground. And here you can see there was about 300 people attended that meeting. And as you can see, the council then were educated as to what was going on, and they also went against the development, and there was a big win at the Gold Coast City Council chambers, which was great. That was subsequently appealed, by the way, by the telco, and but that's another matter. We can talk about that another time. Now, this is probably the biggest, one of the biggest wins that I've probably had. This was the Coogee Residence Incorporated, which is in Dundas Street in Coogee. And basically it was TPG wanted to install 4G as they called it, but it was part of the 5G rollout, was to install a small cell on a telegraph pole about 6 metres away from a child's bedroom. Now, they couldn't have picked a worse street on the country to actually try to install a small cell, because that street has 8 doctors in residence that live in that street, and the poor child that was actually a child of a doctor, and so they engaged me, and we then, as obviously, went on a big campaign to do something about it. It got so far it went to a current affair. If you wanted to have a look at that, you can see the actual story. And then we had a councillor from the council. We had a public meeting, very similar to what we're doing here, but more with the public. And basically the councillor then called for a suspension of the rollout of the mobile, small cell mobile facility across the Randwick City Council area. He was successful, and that's exactly what the council did. TPG then decided that their small cell towers will not roll out. Now, the impressive thing about this is that it wasn't just for that one small cell in Coogee. That was for the entire country. That, in effect, stopped 2,500 small cells in Australia-wide. So that was a huge win. There's a bit of controversy in regards to it, but people said it was the Huawei ban, when in fact it wasn't, because TPG, in a court case, which was a $15 billion merger between TPG and Vodafone, they then announced and basically said that the reason they pulled out of the network was because it was due to health fears. And as you can see there it is. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is just recently 5G are now, or TPG have now formed TPG Telecom, and they are now in a merger with Vodafone, and they are restarting the whole network again. So we've got a bit of another battle on our hands. So even though we won about 2 years ago, they're back on the game. This is another one in Chittering in Western Australia. This was just recently in June. You can see here, but the same thing, we did a community consultation process. They'd been working to try and fight this for 7 years. Within 2 months of my engagement, this is the result that we had. And you can see here, basically it was convincing the council as to the health effects, etc., and what was going on, the law, etc. And that's when they basically passed a motion to issue an abatement notice if they turned the tower on. Now, this is another one that you probably, some of you may have heard of, which is the what we call the Tower of Terror, which is happening up in North Queensland in a place called Peachester up at Maroochydore. And what it is there is that it's got past the council stage, and this has actually gone into court seeking a peace and good behaviour order in regards to assault. And I'm going to talk about that shortly, okay? Now, unfortunately, what happened in this case is that when we first went to court, it was thrown out of court. The magistrate at the time said it was abuse of process, it was incompetent, ordered Mr. Evans to pay $136,000 in costs, and basically would have effectively lost his home. We appealed the decision, and when we appealed it, it went before a district court. The NBN decided and realised that I was correct, that a corporation can be charged with assault, that it wasn't in an incompetent case, and the $136,000 in cost was thrown out. So in essence, there's a this particular case is just pending. We're waiting for the final judgment. The board of NBN were in attendance at this particular hearing. They sought leave to do so, and we agreed to that. Now, within 2 weeks of the hearing, we actually talked about fibre optic cable being the remedy. And we actually said that we don't want our client to be exposed to electromagnetic radiation in his home. He doesn't consent to it. He doesn't want it in his home. We said that the NBN originally had a promise to the Australian people that all houses would be connected to fibre optic cable instead of wireless. Well, NBN went against that promise, and all we asked was that the tower, even though it's connected to fibre optic, should be connected by fibre optic to my client's home, and that would be the safe remedy. Well, lo and behold, 2 weeks after the court case, and we're still waiting for the decision, the NBN did a big backflip, and they're basically saying that 2 million Australian households will be able to demand fibre to the home. This was only just recently. And then the former CTO believes that the NBN might be due to 5G concerns, and there it is. And you'll see here, it's actually gone up higher, so it'll be fibre optic from the tower to the home, and about 8 million households will now be upgraded to that technology, which is great news. So it's sort of like a backpedal from NBN. If you want to look at some material, there's a couple of sites. If you go on to BitChute, you'll see there's a few. I go into detail how 5G sites are blocked, and there's a second part of the 5G summit, which was a worldwide summit I did with a guy called Josh DeSole, and that's the second part there. Okay, so let's get into adverse health effects, and let's get into the facts now. Let's not make anything conspiracy theory. Let's have a look at what the law sees it as far as I'm concerned, and let's look at the scientific and medical consensus in regards to adverse health effects. First of all, we have ORSA, which is the Iociano Radio Frequency Scientific Advisory Association. Now, ORSA is a group of scientists in Australia. They're well known throughout the world, and they're highly regarded. And they're put together, as you can see here with my arrow here, they currently contains over 3,000 scientific studies sourced from all over the world. Now, what they've done, they're all peer-reviewed. It's got the world's largest freely available categorised database of peer-reviewed scientific research. So it's the world's largest database. And let's see what they found. In their database, they found this. And if you look at this chart, you'll see here that 68% of all the studies show a biological health effect. Only 24% show no effect, and 8% was uncertain. So looking just at that, folks, what is the scientific consensus? Is it no effect or effect? I'll leave that up to you. Now, You've probably heard of cancer. Well, there's a thing called an acoustic neuroma or schwannoma, which is a benign cancer in the middle ear, basically brain cancer in a sense. And the Italian court confirmed that there is a link between cell phones and cancer. And they actually found that it went through 6 different court cases, went through the Court of Appeal in Turin, and the ICNIRP, which I'll talk about shortly, tried to present evidence, and the court found that ICNIRP was highly industry biased, and that they took little evidence and little weight from ICNIRP, and they came to the conclusion that cell phones do indeed cause acoustic neuromas in humans. This is an adverse health effect. It is established by a court of law. Okay, very, very important that you understand this. And this is, for the industry to say that there are no adverse health effects is extremely misleading and a misrepresentation of the real facts, because a court of law, being the highest court, being the Court of Appeal, has actually found in favour of the plaintiff in this against a mobile phone manufacturer. Now, this is something that is a fact. Electromagnetic radiation activates dormant or latent viruses, and that it increases the growth of bacteria in secondary infections. So let's have a look at the study, shall we? So this is a study here by Grimaldi, and you'll see here, exposure to 50 Hz electromagnetic field induces activation of the Epstein-Barr virus genome in latently infected human lymphoid cells. So we're not being conspiracy theorists here. It's just simply using studies. This is a 1997 study, so it's not recent. It's been around for donkeys, and it explains that there is, and this is just one of many studies that explain that if you expose a human being to an electric field, electromagnetic field, in this case only 50 Hz, it can wake up dormant viruses in the human body. The other one that's really interesting is in another medical journal, and it talks about the evaluation of the radio frequency radiation effects on the susceptibility, the antimicrobial, I can't even say it, susceptibility and growth rate of the Klebsiella pneumoniae bacteria. So let's have a look at that. So does this frequency or exposure to non-ionising electromagnetic radiation, non-thermal, will it create a change in the growth pattern of this particular bacteria? And if you have a look here, it says this: the radiation effect on the bacterial proliferation was evaluated and showed that exposure enables the bacteria to grow faster in the exponential phase than the non-exposed bacteria. So that's very interesting. Anyway, that's for you to look at yourself and work that out. Now let's talk about leukemia. Now, if I told you that the World Health Organization, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, and in Australia, the Specialist Medical Review Council all agree that leukemia, there is a consistent association between exposure to non-ionising electromagnetic radiation and leukemia. Let's have a look at it. This is a Specialist Medical Review Council. This is a document that's produced by the Australian federal government, and it's basically in relation to the Repatriation Medical Authority. It comes under the auspices of the Veterans Entitlements Act. And basically what it is, it's a Specialist Medical Review Council that looks into veterans as to whether or not they can be, claim for any personal injury whilst they're working in the workplace. And this goes back to 10 years exposure. And they found here, and I'll just read this out, declares that there is sound medical and scientific evidence on which the RMA, which is the Repatriation Medical Authority, could have relied upon to amend the Statement of Principles to include the factors applying to chronic lymphatic leukemia as set out below. And it says there, non-ionising radiation. So they're saying that's a factor for leukemia in adults. Now, the Specialist Medical Review Council looked at pretty much the same studies as what APANSA did, And I think there were around 300 studies that the Specialist Medical Review Council had. They also held special tribunals and commissions and actually had witnesses, and they came to that conclusion after that. You don't get told about this, do you? Now, let's have a look at the APANSA itself, which is the Australian Radiation Protection Nuclear Safety Authority, APANSA, and this is their standard called the maximum exposure levels to radio frequency fields, 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. Let's have a look inside the study, inside the standard, and you'll see here a very short sentence, not much, but it's there. It says, in a study in Sydney, Hocking et al., 1996, showed increased incidence and mortality rates of childhood leukemia in the aggregate of 3 local authority areas close to VHF TV transmitter compared to another areas further away. What this study did in 1996 is that Dr. Bruce Hocking used to be the Chief Medical Officer or Chief Health Officer for Telstra at the time, and he found a cancer cluster around 3 broadcast towers in Sydney, and he found a 60% increase in childhood deaths around those towers. Hence, he wrote a report. It was published in the Australian Medical Journal, and he was subsequently fired from his position after that was printed. But the world then, they were doing similar studies around the world, and this is what came as a result. This is the World Health Organization, and you can find it, so it's quite easy to check. And you'll see here, Electromagnetic Fields and Public Health is the paper on the World Health Organization's website. And you'll see here, they talk about ELF field sources and residential exposures. And it talks about, I'd just like to read this. Electric and magnetic fields exist wherever electric current flows, in power lines and cables, residential wiring, and electrical appliances. Electric fields arise from electric charges and are measured in volts per metre and are shielded by common materials such as wood and metal. Magnetic fields arise from the motion of electric charges, i.e. current, and expressed in Tesla, or more commonly in millitesla or microtesla. And this is the key. I want you to look at this. This is volts per metre and microtesla. And you'll see how this has relevance as we go further. Now, if we have a look at this, it says this. We have short-term effects and long-term effects, which is the World Health Organization is talking about. The APANSA just refers only to short-term effects, saying that there are established biological effects from acute exposure high levels well above 100 microtesla. Believe it or not, 100 microtesla is what the APANSA and ICNIRP are setting as the safety standard that our children should be exposed to in regards to electromagnetic radiation, the magnetic field side of it. But if you look at the heading, it's only for short term, and this is only for 6-minute increments. But what about long term? This is what the World Health Organization says about long term. Much of the scientific research examining long-term risks from ELF magnetic field exposure is focused on childhood leukemia. So much so that in 2002, IARC, which is the International Agency for Research on Cancer, published a monograph classifying ELF magnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic to humans. This classification is used to know an agent for which there is limited evidence of carcinogeny in humans and less than sufficient evidence for carcinogeny in experimental animals. Okay, but let's read this. This classification was based on a pooled analysis of epidemiological studies demonstrating a consistent pattern of 2-fold increase in childhood leukemia associated with average exposure to residential power frequency magnetic fields above 0.3 to 0.4 of a microtesla. So that's the key, that there's a consistent pattern of childhood leukemia above 0.3 to 0.4 of a microtesla, and that is the magic figure that we're going to talk about in the next few slides. Okay, so just remember that. The World Health Organization says for long-term effects, potentially there's a 2-fold increase in regards to a consistent pattern of childhood lymphatic leukemia if exposed over 0.3 of a microtesla. And you'll see here they're talking about, I'll just go through it, but basically they're saying that childhood leukemia is a comparatively rare disease. Well, it might have been comparatively rare in 2002, but it certainly isn't today. Childhood leukemia is one of the most common, blood cancer is the most common cancer that children have today. But back when this was done, and it's still on the WHO website, excuse me for a moment. There we go. Now, this is a study called the Personal Digital Assistance, PDA, Cell Phone Units, etc. And it's basically a paper written by Cindy Sage, Olya Hansen, and Amy Sage, who are all specialists in this area. And what they found, they had a look at the old Palm Pilot that was held, the old BlackBerry, for example, back in 2007. And you'll see here that when they turned the units on, the single ELF EMF pulses were over 90 microtesla on 2 of the units. That is way above 0.3 of a microtesla. So that's a Palm Pilot back in 2007. So what about today? What have we got around today? Well, this one is a study called the Smartphones and Programmable Shunts. And in this particular case, this was basically a medical journal coming to a conclusion as to will magnetic fields from mobile phones affect programmable shunts in the brain. And what they came up with is they then measured the magnetic flux density, or the magnetic field of the actual devices, and they found it was 62 Gauss for an iPhone 5S and 61 Gauss for a Samsung Galaxy S5. Now, I don't know if you understand what a Gauss is, but a Gauss, 1 Gauss, is equivalent to 1,000 microtesla. So what we have here, 100 microtesla, sorry. So what we have here is that for 62 Gauss, that's 6,200 microtesla for an iPhone 5S and 6,100 microtesla for a Samsung Galaxy S5. Now, the APANSA have a supporting document to its safety standard, which shows that EMR alters brain synapse activity at 0.745 volts per meter, and nerves at 6 volts per meter, and the heart at 12 volts per meter. And it also admits that there is no antidote for radiation poisoning. So let's have a look at it, shall we? So this is the supporting document. You'll see up the top, it's APANSA. It's actually what they class as one of their supporting documents. And believe it or not, they recruited Dr. Bruce Hocking and a gentleman by F. Cobbo to come up with this study, and they rely on it. And let's have a look at it. And you can see here, they're saying that the main acute health effects of 50 to 60 hertz electromagnetic fields are caused by the induction of voltage gradients, etc. And it may elicit an action potential and cause excitation of nerve, muscle, and cardiac tissue. And there's a very wide range in excitability of tissue. And if you have a look at it, you'll see here, they're saying that alteration of synapse activity in the brain at 0.075 volts per meter. And you can see the nerve excitation is done at 6.15 volts per meter and also at 12. But look at this. This is important. The cardiac muscle at 12 volts per meter. So basically what the supporting document is saying is that you and I should not be exposed to an electric field of around 12 volts per meter that touches us. Okay, that's how I read it. So, and this is further on, you'll see here, treatment is based on the symptoms and findings on examination. He says, they say in that study, and APANSA obviously agree, there is no antidote for EMF poisoning. There it is. Okay, let's keep going. Now, this is called the Radiation Frequency National Site Archive, or commonly known as the RFNSA website. And basically every single small cell, every single tower that is either in existence or proposed to be put up has to be put into this archive. And all you simply do is type in the suburb or whatever, in this case put in Springwood, and you can see it gives you a list of different towers that you can, and sites that you can look at. So I decided to click on one of them, and in this case it was in Springwood. And you can see there, it gives you a map of where the tower is. But look at this on the right-hand side. You've got a compliance certificate and an APANSA EME report. This APANSA EME report is the crucial document. So let's have a look at it. So this is the EME report itself. And you'll see here, there's the tower. You'll see a number of circles which go out to a radius of 500 meters. So anybody within that circle is being exposed to these percentages and these of radiation in those particular areas. So I'm not really concerned about this in regards to the levels in regards to the APANSA standard. What I am concerned about is this. If you have a look at this, you'll see that in this case it's Telstra and Optus. You'll see here they're putting in, that's an existing tower, and this is what they're proposing. Oops, sorry about this. Okay, you can see what they're proposing. They're proposing to put in all of these new antennae. Now have a look at this one here called an NR 3500. You can see it there. That, folks, is 5G. So whenever you see an NR, that means new radio, 3500. That is the 5G antenna right there. But let's have a look at the volts per meter and the what we call the electric field and the magnetic fields, okay? So let's have a look at it. Now, if we have a look at the existing configuration, if I lived, say, within 50 metres or 100 metres of the tower, you'll see that I'll be exposed to 3 volts per metre, roughly, or in this case, 3.5 volts. And if I even go out further, I'm going to be exposed to more. If I go out to 100 to 200 metres, I'm going to be exposed to 5.7 volts per metre. But then when you look at when they upgrade it, how much a spike it goes up to 12 volts per metre, 12.28 volts per metre. See what's going on there? So what you can see, hang on, they're going up very, very high. But didn't they just tell us in that study that cardiac muscle can be affected at 12 volts per metre? And yet they're allowing this telco to irradiate at 12 volts per metre in the electric field. Now look at the other thing, the power density. They don't actually tell us, they're very convenient. They don't tell us what it is in microtesla, so they confuse us by putting in milliwatts per metre square or microwatts. It depends on which way you like to look at it. But you'll see here, the magnetic field is going from 24.63 way up to a whopping 392.27. We're going to be bathed in magnetic fields with 5G. And that's really what I'm trying to explain to you. And we all know what the World Health Organization says in regards to exposure to magnetic fields. So let's keep going. Now, EHS, which is commonly known, some people call it electromagnetic hypersensitivity or electrosensitivity. But the reality is does it exist? Is it a real thing? There's a case called Dr. Alexander McDonald in Comcare in Australia in the Ministry of Appeals Tribunal. And in that case, we had a CSIRO scientist who was actually getting quite ill from exposure to electromagnetic radiation. He told his employer, the employer tried everything they could, but in the end, the poor bloke couldn't go to work. So he ended up taking the Commonwealth to court for an exacerbation of his condition, being electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Now, they were talking about the symptoms. It talks about that he suffered dizziness, disorientation, nausea, suffered from eczema, tinnitus, pain in the left-hand side of his skull, migraines, and it just went on and on. So, in essence, his condition was pretty bad. He had fatigue, etc., imbalance, tingling sensations, rising blood pressure, and rapid heartbeat. And this was all raised in the court. And there was his doctor was a doctor called Dr. Russell Cooper, and you probably heard of him before. He's one of the team that I have with myself, Dr. Russell Cooper. The APANSA specialists were also representing the Commonwealth in this case, and they lost because Dr. Cooper's evidence prevailed, and you'd find that the court said that EHS, that is electromagnetic hypersensitivity, as diagnosed by Dr. Cooper, was exacerbated by the exposure, and therefore the court even described it as being an ailment. So it's the first time in Australia where the courts have actually recognised that there is an adverse health effect, and here it is here in this particular case. And he says here that this condition, which is is probably described as a derangement of physical, or mental health or function, therefore is a physical or mental disorder or defect within the definition of ailment in the Workers' Compensation Act. So in essence, it says here, he talks about the effects that his pre-existing ailment of electromagnetic hypersensitivity was aggravated by the exposure that he had in the workplace. And the symptoms were also recorded by another doctor, Dr. Koo, who was his normal practitioner, and they then passed him on to Dr. Cooper as the GP, and it was referred to him. Now, these are just some basic medical, just some extracts from medical reports, so you can have a bit of a look at it. This is one report that I've used for Sutherland, for example, and you'll say here, this is from a doctor, it says that the AMA, which I assume is the Australian Medical Association, has advised that biomedical devices may be affected by the electromagnetic emissions from the 5G mobile towers. Our patient lives within 80 metres of the proposed location. He is fitted with a cardiac pacemaker. We are concerned that his pacemaker may be affected by the electromagnetic emissions. This is another extract here from another doctor. These are doctors that I use in various cases, and they've given me permission to give you a little bit of an extract, and obviously they're redacted. But you'll see here, this is another one where a professional opinion was sought as to whether it could pose a health risk. You'll see it here, to you and your family, and your biggest concern is that of your children. Okay, now this report went for around, as you can see, it was about 11 pages long, so I'm not going to go in through the entire report, but the conclusion is this. My conclusion is that you and your family, the residents in a very close proximity to the proposed wireless mobile base station proposed to be erected adjacent to, are at extreme risk of harm to your health due to the immediate proximity to the proposed base station to your residents. Now, that's a pretty serious thing for a doctor to say. An extreme risk of harm. So it poses an extreme risk of harm. Okay? So this is a big question then. Do medical practitioners use the APANSA standard and advice, okay, from APANSA and ACMA to diagnose and treat their patients? ACMA is the Australian Communications and Media Authority. APANSA is the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency that come up with the APANSA safety standards. Well, first of all, let's look at APANSA to see what their position is. Okay, now I don't know if you can read that very well, but this is the disclaimer, so I'll see if I can enlarge it a little bit for you. Let's have a look at their disclaimer. This is what APANSA says on their website. We provide this website to disseminate for the benefit of the public both information on the regulation of radiation used by the Commonwealth and general information on the impact of radiation on health. While we make every effort to ensure the information on this website is accurate and informative, the information cannot and does not take the place of professional or medical advice directly applicable to your own circumstances. Do not use our information to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, and do not use our information as a substitute for the advice of a health professional as it relates to your individual circumstances. That's exactly what I did and what I do. I get my clients to see a medical practitioner. I don't bother with the APANSA safety standards because they're completely irrelevant. A doctor's advice reigns supreme over the APANSA standard, as simple as that. Now, if you look at it, it says here, we do not accept any liability for any injury, loss or damage incurred by use or reliance on the information provided on our website. Let's have another look at another document. Talk to a scientist. They put this up, okay? Now, it says here, it's a unique opportunity for the public community to talk directly with our scientists on issues about radiation exposure and protection in Australia. But if you have a look here, it says right at the bottom, please note, our experts are unable to provide medical advice. Medical questions should be directed to a medical practitioner. There it is. One would assume that if you're seeking health advice from APANSA, you're not going to get it because they're telling you you should go and see a medical practitioner instead. And they actually advise it. There it is. What does APANSA advise? On the basis of current scientific information, there is no established evidence that EHS is caused by EMF at levels below exposure guidelines. Now, how can they say that? Are they medical practitioners? APANSA acknowledges that the health symptoms experienced by the affected individuals are real. That's a bit strange. First of all, they're saying that there's no established evidence that EHS is caused, but then they're acknowledging that EHS exists because they say it's a real and can be a disabling problem. And they even say here, advise those affected to seek medical advice from a qualified medical specialist. Okay? So let's keep going. So what do doctors use to diagnose, treat patients? They certainly don't use the APANSA website, and they certainly don't use the APANSA standards or the ICNIRP standards. They use the World Health Organization's ICD-10. Now, the ICD-10 is called the International Classification for Diseases. And think of the word disease for a minute. That's basically any adverse health effect for treatment and diagnosis on the ICD-10. So if we go further, you'll see here where it actually explains it. This is the International Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, and it says here, permits the classification of environmental events and circumstances in the cause of injury, poisoning, and other adverse effects. So what it's really saying is, okay, if it's in the ICD-10, it's a adverse effect. Let's keep going. And here it is, folks, under W90 of the ICD-10. Okay, it shows exposure to other non-ionizing radiation. It's got here infrared, laser, radio frequency, radiation. There it is. Okay, that is what doctors use. There is no limit to the exposure there. There's no like safety levels. This is purely a diagnostic tool that doctors use, and they use the W90 for that purpose. I'm not going to go into the full detail of this, obviously, but that's how it works. So let's get into the nitty-gritty now. What is 5G? Well, let's first of all look at what APANSA says 5G is. Okay? Now, if you have a look up here, it says that it's new technology using millimetre waves. It's new and emerging technologies that are operating at frequencies greater than 6 gigahertz. Okay? For example, millimetre wave scanners, the 5G mobile network, and wireless power transfer systems. All right, what's this? 5G mobile phone network and wireless power transfer systems. Has anyone looked into that? I have, and I'm going to explain all this to you as to what 5G really is. Okay. It's about optical and wireless convergence in 5G networks. So we have an optical wireless, and we have the wireless power transfer. So you've got two different things, as well as your normal data and voice, etc. So let's have a first look at optical wireless communication, known as OWC. And the most important thing you've got to see here is the wireless bit. Optical normally is done through fibre optic, but in this case, it's going to be done wireless. And this is where we get the laser beam technology they're talking about, and it's sending carrier waves. So not only going to be exposed to RF electromagnetic radiation, but you're also going to be exposed to ultraviolet radiation. So let's have a look at these. So this is a bit of a concept sort of explaining how the network sort of works. You've got this big circle around here, which is the fibre optic cable network. Sorry about this, my laptop plays up. You can see here there's and you've got your macro towers, and you've got your satellites, and you've got all different things. But let's have a little bit of a better look at it. So this is fibre optic cable, and you all know about fibre optic cable. You've heard of it before. It's basically about transmitting light, and they use ultraviolet light, infrared, etc., through the fibre optic cable. But did you know that all the big macro towers, sorry about this, I've got a very touchy computer. If you have a look here in this little slide, you'll see we've got a macro tower. And That's the big towers, the big ugly ones. And you've got your small cells. But I don't know if you knew this, but under the ground, they're all connected to fibre optic cable. Did you know that? So that fibre optic cable that you just saw, they all connect to fibre optic cable. And what they do is they convert the fibre optic into wireless transmissions to your cell phones, etc., into your homes, etc. So in essence, the safe alternative is to simply, instead of connecting the tower to fibre optic, why don't they just connect the homes as well? Why are they going just to the towers? And why are they just going to the small cells? Well, let's find out why. Here we have, I don't know if can you all see that quite well? Anka, can you just give me you there, Anka?
Yes, we can see it. Yep.
Okay, you can't see the all of us on the right-hand side, can you? At the same time, no? Okay.
No, I can't see everyone all at the same time, but I can see you.
Okay, that's fine, okay. So if we have a look here, you'll see here the optical wireless communications, we use infrared, visible light and ultraviolet light. But if you have a look at it, this is the spectrum we're talking about. So that's where infrared, violet, visible light and ultraviolet light ranges in. Very borderline on X-rays, as you can see, which is ionising. Okay, almost ionising in this, it's a grey area. And here's the RF. So not only, this is a normal RF that you all think you're just going to be exposed to. Well, you're not. You're going to also be exposed to this. So you're going to be exposed to both of these fields. And here you can see this is optical wireless communications in 5G and Internet of Things in the platforms. You can see it's used in smart homes, with car communications, underwater communications, etc., satellite space, the whole bit. Okay, and it's all not only just radio frequency, but it's also ultraviolet light and lasers, etc. So now let's talk about wireless power transfer. What is that? Wireless power transfer, and this is the best way to explain it. This is a gap. We've got two devices. We have a light bulb over here and a power supply over here. What happens is you have an electric current going around a coil, which produces a strong magnetic field. The magnetic field from this current connects with the magnetic field from this one, and then we have what we call a power transfer. Now, the best way to explain it to you is imagine this was a mobile phone, this light bulb, and this one over here was the tower. So in essence, they have to have an identical vibration frequency. So let's say they're operating at 6 gigahertz on this tower. The phone has to vibrate and operate at the same frequency in order for the power transfer to occur. So in effect, what they're doing is they're using magnetic fields created by electric currents to transfer electricity from one device to the other. That's what 5G, or one component of 5G is. And this is what they use it for. You will see here that wireless power transmission is used for autonomous vehicles, for example. So as a car drives down the street, it will be charged by wireless electricity. Okay. And they use small cells to enable that to be a little bit more even and more distributed. They also will have it in homes. So basically you'll have various chips implanted in your phones, in all your smart devices, etc., which will enable the frequency to be higher and vibrate at the same frequency as your towers and your small cells, your satellites, etc. And basically it's designed to allow the transfer of electricity. So no longer will you need power lines or power cords to have your phone, your TV, microwave oven, etc. connected to a power lead. And here you see that the IEEE have been talking about this for ages, about 5th generation mobile technology in regards to wireless powered wearables, so things that you wear on the body, and you need those small cell base stations to allow those devices to be charged as you walk past them, including your mobile phones. Okay, and here you can see the IEEE in cahoots with the IEEE, which is the International Conference of Communications in China just recently, had a big workshop on the wireless power transfer and communication networks. There it is. And this is where we get into the most important part now, so as you understand where this all fits in. Space satellites, they orbit from 160 kilometres to 36,000 kilometres. 5G emits both data and electricity via microwaves and millimetre waves. And it's approximately 100,000 will be in orbit in the next 5 years. There's only about 8,000 up there at the moment. All right. SpaceX, Starlink, as you can see here, they've just increased their load up to 42,000. When you've got Verizon and Amazon, etc., all putting up satellites, it's going to increase it up to 100,000 very soon. So why? And that's what it's going to look like. That's an artist's demonstration of what 40,000 satellites will look like. Imagine what 100,000 is going to do. And this gives you a bit of a demographic of how things have progressed in the years. So you imagine this is 2018. What's 100,000 going to start looking like? So it just gives you a bit of an idea. Now, this is something that you're probably not aware of. We have satellites. They've all told us that 5G doesn't go very far. Oh, hang on. Satellites orbit at around 36,000 kilometres in space. What do you mean it doesn't go very far? It's because they use laser beam technology and they use the ultraviolet light in order to do this. And they talk directly to a ground network. In this case, it's your small cells. These ground networks are what we call earth stations or small cells, and your satellite communicates directly with them using laser. And they need line of sight in order for that to work. So that's why they need so many of them. But the other thing that I want you to have a look at is these things called HAPs. Now, you've probably never heard of these before, and let's talk about HAPs now. Now, this is HAPs here. It floats around 20 kilometres above the Earth. It's not actually in space. You can see the satellites are up here, but HAPs are just below it, okay? They sort of hang around above the clouds, and they're known as high-altitude platform stations or high-altitude pseudo-satellites. They're equivalent, each one of them is equivalent to 1,800 mobile base stations. They fly at an altitude of 20 kilometres. They circle in a 200-kilometre radius. They send 5G, and they fly for months at a time. Their wingspan is 78 metres long. Fly for months, as I just said. And this gives you an indication of what they do. So they're equivalent to 1,800 base stations. You can see there's a macro base station here. That gives you an idea of the radiation that we're going to be hit with. Okay? And that gives you a bit of an idea. And there you see it circles. That's an artist's impression of what it looks like. They're putting them, and you're probably wondering, where are they coming from? Who's putting them up? Well, we are. If you have a look at it, the world's first operational HAPS has been from Wyndham in Western Australia. And there it is. And it's called the Zephyr program. And that's the site there where they send the HAPS. And as you can see, it's a gap filler. They basically harvest electricity from space with the satellites, transfer the electricity to the HAP, and then it comes down to us to recharge our devices. But it's also designed to transfer data, etc. as well, voice, the whole bit. Now, there's a safe alternative. There's a thing called the SCAR project. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called the Square Kilometre Array, and it works predominantly with fibre optic. And what the SCAR project is it's again in Western Australia. It's the world's largest telecommunications radio telescope. It's a square kilometre of satellite dishes, which they cannot have any electromagnetic radiation interference. So what they use is fibre optic, and they have what we call a white zone, which means people are not to use mobile phones within about a 300-kilometre radius from this facility. It's in Murchison in Western Australia. Now, what's interesting is that we all know that wireless communications through 5G gives us about 10 gigabits of data per second. Fibre optic is way more superior. Fibre optic in this case, which they did before they connected this up, was 400 gigabits of data per second. way more. Now, they've actually got it up to 64,000 gigabits per second right now. So that gives you an idea of why they use fibre optic cable to connect towers underground, is because fibre optic is far more superior and has a lot less latency than wireless. So just understand that wireless communications are at 10 gigabits per second with 5G, while fibre optic will be 64,000 gigabits per second. Way more superior. Now, this is the crucial question. Does electromagnetic radiation applied in 5G touch or penetrate the skin? Let's see what APANSA says. You'll see here APANSA say that at 6 gigahertz, it says here, new emerging technologies are operating at frequencies greater than 6 gigahertz. It talks about the 5G network. In the frequency range above 6 gigahertz and 300 gigahertz, the current safety guidelines, including the Australian RF standard, prevent excessive heating. But hang on, it says this. At such frequencies, the depth of RF EME in tissue is relatively short, less than 8 millimeters. So what it's telling us is that it's actually touching us and penetrating our skin to a depth of 8 millimeters. Now, if we have a look at this one, this is they talk about the 5G new generation mobile phone network, etc. And Ken Karapetis actually talks about it here. He says, Dr. Karapetis details that the 5G network will initially use frequencies in the current mobile phone network, then move to higher frequencies where the depth of RF EME penetration into human tissue is short. Now, if that's not an admission, consequently, the energy is absorbed mostly within the skin, where surface heating is the predominant effect. At these higher 5G frequencies, the limits of the APANSA standard are set to prevent excessive heating to the surface of the skin and the eyes. Well, what I'm concerned about is that this stuff is actually, they're admitting that it's touching us and it's actually penetrating our skin. And how does that work in law? We'll get to that in a minute. This is an ABC. They're saying the same thing here. They talk about the Professor Litsky. They talk about APANSA here. And it says here that research published on the APANSA's website said 5G technology could penetrate skin to a depth of 8 millimeters. And as APANSA Assistant Director, Dr. Ken Karapetis, said that more research was needed. At the frequencies where 5G will be operating, the RF electromagnetic energy does not penetrate much further than the surface of the skin. So this is the APANSA admitting that it does penetrate our skin. It's touching us. This is the APANSA standard itself. Let's see what that says about touching us and penetrating our skin. Where I'm coming with this, folks, is what's called an assault. And this is where I'm coming from. Do you consent to this touching? All right, so let's have a look at APANSA. This is where it says here, this is in the standard itself. However, for exposure to frequencies above 6 gigahertz, most of the absorbed energy is deposited near the skin within a centimetre of the surface. So this is the evidence that I use for court purposes. The IGNIRT guidelines. This is supposed to be the world recognised organisation, which is not a government body. It's just set up by supposedly independent scientists. The Court of Turin in Italy, with the case where they found the acoustic schwannoma caused by cell phone use, basically poo-pooed the IGNIRT standard and said that it's fully biased by industry, and they didn't give it much weight. Anyway, if you have a look on the IGNIRT, it says this: penetration depth of human skin tissue, dermis, for frequency 6 to 300 gigahertz. And there it is. It says at 6 gigahertz, it'll penetrate about 8.1 millimeters into the skin. So it's established that RF, electromagnetic radiation, does penetrate, well, 5G will penetrate our skin. So what do you do about it? Well, not you, but what have my clients done about it in the past? Well, they've served a notice of removal of consent to touch their person and to irradiate their home. And this is what's known as a warning and objection notice. And on this particular notice, it's saying, I do not consent to you irradiating electromagnetic radiation on my person, touch me, etc. And if you have a look at the bottom, it says, if you fail to, I'll just read this, if I can find it. I demand that you discontinue any attempts by you or your agents to emit and apply force in the form of electromagnetic radiation upon my residence. I respectfully request that you inform me immediately of your decision as to whether or not you'll proceed to emit electromagnetic radiation onto my residence. If you intend to disregard my fears, concerns, and the medical advice and make it known to me by either letter or conduct that you'll proceed regardless, then I will treat such intentional conduct as an intentional threat to physically assault my family and myself with electromagnetic radiation. So let's now talk about assault, okay? So as you understand, now we're getting into the law, okay? So you've now got a basic understanding as to what 5G is, what the radiation is, about the magnetic field issue and so on. But the real issue here is that you're getting touched by this stuff. My clients have medical opinions from doctors because the PANSA advises that, and we send those medical opinions to the telcos and to councils, etc. And it's really up to the councils and telcos to determine as to what they're going to do with that material. So now I'm going to go into the law now, and this is the real nitty-gritty stuff. So please bear with me. It can be a little bit confusing, but we'll see how we go. All right, so I'm now going to share the screen with that. Just bear with me. So assault. Now, if the offence of assault has been committed, the prosecution must prove that the accused applied force to the complainant's body. And you'll see I've got case law backing up what I'm saying, all right, which is what we do as lawyers. The force applied need not be violent and may be as slight as a mere touch. So in this case, do you think that the force, in this case of using electromagnetic radiation, is a force that is touching us? Well, we've already proven that in some form. Force may be applied directly or through the medium of a weapon or instrument controlled by the accused. Well, this is clearly controlled by somebody, be it a corporation or a person. The accused is in control of instrument being the base station tower used to apply force in the form of electromagnetic radiation or energy. And the prosecution must prove that the application of force was intentional or reckless. So there's two things. It can either be intentional or it can be reckless. For the application of force to have been reckless, the accused must have realised that his or her conduct would probably result in force being applied to the complainant's body. So let's now get into it. Let's get into the law. This is, because this is a presentation for SEAM, which is based in South Australia, I thought I'd use South Australian law so that you can see where South Australia looks at, and I'll use some comparisons with other states. But this is not for the entire country. So each state's different, but I'm sort of trying to concentrate purely on South Australia here. Now, under the Criminal Law Consolidation Act of 1935 in South Australia, if we look at Division 7 for assault, you'll see it there, it is. Section 20 is assault. Now let's find out what actually assault is. And it says assault, a person commits an assault if the person, without the consent of another person, either A, intentionally applies force directly or indirectly to the victim, or in this particular case, look at this, B, intentionally makes physical contact directly or indirectly with the victim, knowing that the victim might reasonably object to the conduct in the circumstances, whether or not the victim was at the time aware of the contact. So in this particular case, what we're saying here is that if you're going to expose me with electromagnetic radiation, I've sent you a notice saying, I don't consent to being touched by that stuff, don't touch me, then we're now setting up the telco and anybody else that's associated with its approvals, etc., for a criminal offence, if that makes sense. So let's keep going. You'll see here under Section 2, 20 subsection 2, you'll see it here. Contact that lies within the limits will be generally accepted as part of the normal community situation, and conduct that is justified or excused by law cannot amount by an assault. So let's talk about that shortly And you're probably thinking, oh, but that's how the telcos get away with it, because they've got the Telecommunications Act, they've got all these other acts out there, that's got a development approval, etc. Therefore, that surely must apply. Well, I can tell you now it doesn't. Okay. And it's unfortunately, I'll just keep going, just bear with me. So this is a case called Regina and Pritchard. Now, because we've got some New South Wales viewers and also Queensland viewers, I thought I'd throw this in, because this is a common law interpretation of what actual assault is and the definition. And you'll see here that they've actually applied this. And it says here, assault is not defined in the Crimes Act. This is in regards to New South Wales, but it has been observed that Section 245 of the Queensland Criminal Code represents an attempt to reproduce the common law. So in effect, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal has looked at the definition of assault and looked at whether and what applied force is, and they've come to the conclusion that 245 is probably the best representation of what it is in Queensland. So this is what they've this is basically what it said. And you'll see here, this is, you can see here, a person who strikes, touches or moves, term applies force, you can see there. If we go to the actual Queensland Criminal Code, you'll see the actual definition here. So it means this, a person who strikes, touches or moves. So there's the word, touches or moves or otherwise applies force of any kind to the person of another, either directly or indirectly, without that other person's consent, and I won't go into all the rest of it, is said to constitute an assault. Now, applied force is very, very important. If you have a look on the bottom, it says applied force includes the case of applying heat, light, and there it is, folks, electrical force, gas, odour, or any other substance or thing, whatever if applied in such a degree as to cause either injury or, there it is, personal discomfort. Now, personal discomfort can be in the form of dizziness, headaches. It can also be in the form of fear. I'm scared of this thing. I went and saw my doctor. I got some medical advice from my doctor. The doctor told me that the doctor's looked at the science and has come to a conclusion that it poses an extreme risk of harm to my health. Well, that's causing me some very discomfort, some serious fear. It would apply, as far as I'm concerned, under the assault provision. All right. Now, can the crime of assault using force with electromagnetic radiation be lawful, justified and excused by law in regards to the Telecommunications Act, radiation protection legislation, planning schemes, development approvals and radiation levels that comply with the PANZA standards and advice of the state's chief health medical officer? Well, first of all, I'd just like to say this. The simple answer is that the criminal offences, none of these can excuse you from a criminal offence. Just because you've been allowed to make a development application, etc., it doesn't excuse you from touching if consent is withdrawn from a victim. Okay, simple as that. Okay, now the proof, if you take this to court, the proof as to whether or not, because it's a defence, that the actual telco has to prove that the lawful authority and they had a lawful and reasonable excuse to irradiate you with electromagnetic radiation. They have to prove it, not the actual prosecutor. Okay, so it says here, in a proceedings for an offence against this act, which is material to establish whether an act was done with or without lawful authority, lawful excuse or reasonable excuse, the onus of proving the authority excuse lies on the defendant. And in the absence of such proof, it'll be presumed that no such authority or excuse exists. Now, the simple fact is this, folks, that just because I sought approval under a planning scheme to build a tower, the only thing that can be lawful, justified and excused by law is if the person gave consent to being touched by the radiation. Got absolutely nothing to do with the Telecommunications Act. Doesn't even apply. Okay? Now, how can you prosecute this? How can you prosecute a charge of assault? You can either go for a police complaint or you can do it yourself through what we call a private prosecution. And let's have a look at the law. South Australian Act says this, Criminal Procedure Act 921, 49, information. Now, information, that actually really means complaint, okay? Where a person is suspected of having committed a summary offence, an information or complaint may be laid in the magistrate's court in accordance with the rules charging the person with the offence. An information or complaint may be laid by the complainant or the informant personally. So the victim can simply go in and have the telco charge for assault and make them appear in court on a criminal offence of assault, okay? Or by a legal practitioner, which is probably a recommended way of doing it, or other person duly authorised to lay the information on the informant's behalf. Now, another person duly authorised would normally be a police officer, okay? Now, these laws apply pretty much Australia-wide. Some states have removed the private prosecution of availability, but it still applies in South Australia. Okay, and if you want to look at it, you can go look at the Law Handbook of South Australia in regards to laying a charge, and it talks about the same thing. And it says here, a private citizen who lays an information must carry on the prosecution. Now, what's really interesting in South Australia is that if you start a prosecution, you go through it to the end, which basically means you stay on the case. In other states, the DPP or the police take over. In this, it's very unique in South Australia that you can technically continue to carry on the prosecution, which is a real Achilles heel for the telcos, I can tell you. So can a corporation, its directors and employees be criminally liable for assault? Well, the simple answer is yes. Under the Acts Interpretation Act, you'll find it gives you a definition of what a person actually is. And here it says that a person or body or party includes a body corporate. So when we go through the criminal code, you'll see, if I go back, if I can get there, assault, it says a person, which means it can either be an individual or a body corporate. There it is. So the Acts Interpretation Act gives us a definition of what person actually means. All right, so let's keep going. Okay, now the other thing is there's actually an offence, believe it or not, in South Australia of causing physical or mental harm. Now let's have a look at that, shall we? Now, in this cause, you'll see here under Section 21, under the Criminal Law Consolidation Act, 1935, a person causes harm if the person's conduct is the sole cause of the harm or substantially contributes to the harm. Harm means physical or mental harm, whether temporary or permanent. Oops. Physical harm includes pain. You can see there, pain's a pretty important little thing. So if I'm suffering pain, such as headaches or anything like that, that's physical harm. Or if you have a look at this, it says recklessly. A person is reckless in causing harm or serious harm to another if the person is aware of substantial risk that his or her conduct could result in harm or serious harm as the case requires, and engages in the conduct despite the risk and without adequate justification. And this is the issue. Engages in the conduct despite the risk and without adequate justification. When my clients send a medical report to the telco and they don't listen to that medical report and they continue regardless, well, then you can see where it's starting to apply under the law. Now, serious harm means harm that endangers a person's life or harm that consists of or results in serious and protracted impairment of a physical or mental function. And you can start to see now how the law is applied in regards to electromagnetic radiation. Now, there is conduct that falls outside the ambit of this, and it's all to do, and this is where I talked about before about it must be lawful or justified or excused by law. The only conduct that falls outside of this is if you've been given consent. Nothing about the Telecommunications Act, nothing about the development applications or approvals, Nothing about the appends a standard. The only thing it says there is if lawful consent has been given. All right, that's the only defence that you can raise. You can't raise, oh, but I'm merely following the Telecommunications Act and I'm merely following, you know, I've got approval by council, etc. Now, causing serious harm is a pretty serious offence. For a basic offence, it's imprisonment for 20 years. For an aggravated offence, which basically means using a tool or a device, it goes up a little bit higher. You've got to be careful. Bear with me for a minute. Thing here called public sector is care and diligence, and this is very, very important. And it says here that a corporate agency member must at all times exercise a reasonable degree of care and diligence in the performance of his or her duties. Okay? If a corporate agency member is culpably, oops, sorry, I know it's a bit boring, is culpably negligent in the performance of his or her functions, the member is guilty of an offence. So this is under the Public Sector Honesty and Accountability Act. Okay? Now, let's have a look at the South Australian Public Health Act. And it talks about the objectives of the Health Act. And it's to promote the objectives of the Health Act, to promote health and well-being of individuals and communities and to prevent disease, medical conditions, such as EHS, for example, and disability through a public health approach, and to protect individuals and communities from risks, not established health effects, but from risks of a health effect. That's a very important word. To public health and to assure, so far as reasonably practical, a healthy environment for all South Australians, particularly those who live within disadvantaged communities. And it says to provide for the development of effective measures for the early detection, management and amelioration of the risks to public health. And it goes on and on and on. To provide for the monitoring of any disease or medical condition, and goes on and on. So basically, and to provide for the collection of information about incidence and prevalence of diseases and other risks to health in South Australia for research or public health purposes. Okay, so let's keep going. So that's the Public Health Act. And there's a general duty. Now, this general duty applies to everyone. It not only applies to telcos, it applies to decision makers, it applies to everyone. Okay, a person must take all reasonable steps to prevent or minimise any harm to public health caused by or likely to be caused by anything done or omitted to be done by the person. Sorry about this. And you'll see here, in determining what is reasonable for the purposes of subsection 1, regard must be had, amongst other things, to the objects of this Act, which I just read out, and 2, the potential impact of a failure to comply with the duty, any environmental, social, economic or practical implications, any degrees of risk that may be involved, the nature, extent and duration of any harm, and goes on, okay? If there is a perceived, and this is the precautionary principle, and this is something that everyone has to understand, if there is a perceived material risk to public health, this is how we won the Wilson's Creek Tower issue, was because the council, we talked about the precautionary principle, the precautionary approach, which basically means that lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures to prevent, control or abate that risk. And you hear me talking about abatement and all that sort of stuff a lot. So here it is that there's material risk to a material risk, not that it's causing anything, that there's a risk. That lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures, okay? A careful evaluation of what steps need to be taken to avoid, where practical, serious harm to public health, okay? And with an aim to ensure minimum disruption to an individual's activities, a community's function and commercial activity consistent with providing any necessary protection from identified public health risks. So let's keep going. So that's the precautionary principle. Now, the functions of councils. Now, under the Public Health Act, a council is the local public health authority for its area. I don't know if you were aware of that, but in South Australia, that is what the Public Health Act says. So really, when it comes to public health authority in regards to the Public Health Act, it's really the council that needs to apply it, as you can see there, okay? And it's to take action to preserve, protect and promote public health within its area. That is its function, to take action to preserve, protect and promote public health within its area, okay? To identify risks of public health within its area, okay? Insofar as it's reasonably practical, to have adequate measures in place within its area to ensure that activities do not adversely affect public health. Very, very important that the council is the local public authority on this particular issue. Now, what happens if the council fails to perform a function under the Act? There's actually provision for that. And if the opinion of the minister, a council has failed in whole or part to perform a function conferred on the council under this Act, the minister may consult with the council in relation to the matter, and there can be directions made, and you can imagine the stink that that could cause. And it's very important that if the council fails to comply, that the withdrawal of powers to the council can be taken away, it can be transferred to the public health officer and all sorts of things. But you'll find that if the council doesn't act, you'll find that the members of the public and activists will certainly pounce on this, this issue and put pressure on the minister, okay? Now, there is a defence of due diligence that you'll find in the Public Health Act, and it says that in any proceedings against a person for an offence under this part is a defence to prove that the person took all reasonable precautions and exercised all due diligence to prevent the commission of the offence. So just be aware of that. And yep, let's keep going. Mindful of the time. There's a material risk to public health. A person who causes a material risk to public health intentionally or recklessly and with the knowledge that harm to public health will result is guilty of an offence. So this can apply to a telco, for example, and the council can apply that action against a telco. Okay. Now, if we have a look at the interpretation, I'm just going to show you really quickly what a medical condition is, and we talked about this through some of the legislation in South Australia. All it is a medical symptom, that's it, or pattern of medical symptoms, including symptoms discerned from any signs or results of investigations that indicate a disease, whether defined or yet to be determined. So electromagnetic hypersensitivity would certainly come under that interpretation of what a medical condition is under the Public Health Act. Okay, let's talk about environmental harm very quickly. You'll see that for the purpose of this Act, environmental harm is any harm or potential harm to the environment at whatever degree or duration, and it goes on, includes environmental nuisance and all other issues, okay? And you'll see here there's material environmental harm, but we won't go into that just now. Local Nuisance and Liable Control Act, you've probably heard of this before, and it talks about what is the meaning of a local nuisance. And some of you councillors will probably sit there and say, well, electromagnetic radiation wouldn't cover under that because it's not a noise or it's not an odour. Well, technically it is a noise. Electromagnetic radiation is a frequency, it's actually a vibration. But if you have a look at this, they'll probably say, well, it doesn't cover it. Well, I've got news for everybody, because Section 17, if you go to the Schedule 1 of the actual Act and the Local Nuisance and Litter Control Act, it says this, and they put this in particularly, it says things that are a local nuisance, declared agent, vibration is a declared agent for the purpose of Section 71A. So there we go. So basically vibration is now considered a nuisance. So therefore, causing a local nuisance, a person who carries on an activity intentionally or recklessly with the knowledge that local nuisance will result is guilty of an offence. You can see the offences there. Body corporates get hit this, natural person, etc. And what can councils do about it? Well, again, in the Local Nuisance and Litter Control Act, there's a defence of due diligence, that they looked at everything. But if they're being handed with a legal opinion that says it's going to cause assault, they've been handed a medical opinion saying that it's going to poses an extreme risk of harm to health, and they do nothing about it, you can imagine that it's going to now become a bit of a nuisance, because technically the sole role for the emitter is to put a tower. Its sole role is to send electromagnetic radiation over the fence into the neighbouring property. That is a nuisance if it's not consented to and it causes discomfort to a person. Okay. Now, you can then, under Section 30, a nuisance and litter abatement notices, the minister or the relevant council may issue, there it is, a nuisance abatement notice for in connection with securing compliance with Part 4, etc., etc. So that's some of the remedies that a council can actually do. And that's including if you've already passed a development application and they've got a tower already built, doesn't matter if they're causing a nuisance and someone's complaining about it, then technically because of the vibrations from the nuisance, which is the frequency, then in essence an abatement notice could possibly be, you'll need to get legal advice on that with your legal team. Okay. What else? We'll keep going. Oh, the other thing I'd like to mention too is that the nuisance can be damage to property, as you're probably aware of. You'll see here, make good any damage to property. The best way to explain it is that when a person's home is irradiated with electromagnetic radiation 24 hours a day, they've got a medical opinion. Usually what happens is the doctor will say, well, the house has become contaminated, so it's not suitable for living in. So technically we have property damage as well. Okay. Now, if a council has reason to believe that an offence has been committed under the Local Nuisance and Litter Control Act, or may have resulted in material environmental harm or serious bodily harm, the council must, it's no yes, ifs or buts, the council must notify the Environmental Protection Authority of that belief. So if you're aware of a nuisance or some environmental harm or harm coming the way of the public under the Public Health Act, whatever it might be, under this particular, the Local Nuisance and Litter Control Act, it's saying that you must notify the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, the same thing in New South Wales, under the Local Government Act, under Section 125, we have an abatement of public nuisances, and the council may abate a public nuisance or order a person responsible for a public nuisance to abate it. And you'll see there that it goes on. So, okay. Now, wireless telecommunication is regarded as a public benefit. However, if an individual suffers inconvenience caused by wireless telecommunication, then the public benefit doesn't apply. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this and saying, well, hang on, surely the public benefit overrides an individual's harm or discomfort. Well, guess what? That's not correct. The High Court has already ruled that, and you'll see it's really well-established law here, that it is no justification that the inconvenience caused by it is less than the public benefit derived from its existence. And there's the cases of R and Ward, which goes way, way back, R and Train, and then we got the McCullough and Ryder case, which is a High Court case in Australia, which makes that quite clear. So there you go. So the public benefit does not override an individual's right to the quiet enjoyment of their home. All right. Now, the other remedies that are available is that you can, well, not you, but my clients have sought restraining applications and orders. And you can see here that each state has a different term for them. South Australia, we've got the Intervention Order, which comes under the Intervention Orders Prevention of Abuse Act 2009. Queensland, we have the Peace and Good Behaviour Orders that you can issue. Tassie, Restraint Orders, etc. So each state has a different piece of legislation, and they're all different orders, but they're all the same thing. They're stopping, restraining your neighbour from potentially harming you or threatening to harm you with assault. And this is how it's been applied in practice. You'll see here, this is a complaint that was filed some years ago. This is the first time we actually applied it in Queensland, which was under the Peace and Good Behaviour Act. And you'll see here that the complainant in the state of Queensland swears that the defendant has threatened to assault or do any bodily injury. And what's really interesting, it says to destroy or damage any property of the complainant. So it's both. So it's not only assault, it's also damage to property. Okay. And that the intentional conduct in this case of this particular company was directed at the complainant and caused the complainant to fear that the defendant will destroy or damage any property of the complainant. And it goes through the grounds, which we won't go into that right now. But what we have here is a summons. Now, if you have a look at this, this is a summons for the telco to actually appear in court for a peace and good behaviour order, and it usually comes in the criminal jurisdiction, even though it's sort of civil in quasi-criminal, it still goes in the criminal jurisdiction. If it's breached, then it becomes criminal. But anyway, this is a justice of the peace, and I'll just read this, that a complaint has been made before me and has been substantiated to my satisfaction that on the 27th of October at such and such in the state of Queensland, you threatened to assault. So here it is. So here you've got a justice of the peace is ordering and signed a summons, looked at the evidence and come to the conclusion that there's enough evidence to put this person or this corporation in court to appear on a, to answer to a peace and good behaviour application for an order. And then we have the order that is sought there, okay? Now, in New South Wales, for example, we have an application for an apprehended personal violence order. Each state has a different application. This one here comes under the Crimes Domestic Personal Violence Act 2007, and South Australia is obviously similar, and you just have to go through the relevant ones. But it's probably best to get legal advice if you're going to do anything like that, okay? Now, whoops. Now, I'm going to, my final thing I'd like to talk about is that a lot of councils have been told there's a case called the Telstra Corporation Limited against Hornsby Shire Council. Now, you've probably been told this, and the telcos will come and explain this to you quite at length. And they'll say in this particular case, the Hornsby Shire Council got all these submissions, and I'll just put myself on video so everyone can see me. Can you see me there, Anchor? Hello?
Yes, we can see you, Ray.
Okay, right. So how it works is like this. So in the Telstra Hornsby Shire Council case, what had happened is that the council received all these objections to a development application, to a tower from Telstra, against Telstra. And the council accepted all those submissions, and it was on health grounds and all sorts of things. But the objectors got their evidence from the internet. So the objectors went on the internet and looked at a study, and then they downloaded and put it as part of their submission to the council. Now, the law sees that as being irrational evidence, which means that it's not backed up by an expert. You have the objectors didn't submit any expert evidence. They only got their own evidence that they put off the internet. Unfortunately, in Hornsby Shire Council, that's exactly what happened. The council listened to the objectors. They looked at all the evidence that was sent to them by this objectors, and then they disapproved or rejected the development application. Now, the Telstra appealed that, and they won. And the reason they won is because the council said that, the court said that it was irrational, the decision that the council made, because the council made its decision on non-expert evidence. So what I do is I provide the expert evidence to my clients, either legal advice and mainly with a medical opinion. If a medical opinion is given, then that becomes what we call rational evidence, and therefore it overrides the Hornsby Shire Council case. So you'll hear a lot of telcos telling you about that. The other thing you'll hear a lot of them talking about is that you have the Chief Medical Officer of Australia came out and said that 5G is perfectly safe. Now, you've probably heard about that. Well, to be quite frank with you, Dr. Murphy is not any of my clients' doctor. Certainly hasn't consulted with my clients as a doctor-patient relationship, and quite frankly cannot interfere between that doctor-patient relationship. And it'd be very wrong for anyone to interfere on that ground. So technically, that's how we've attacked the issue in regards to the Chief Medical Officer coming out saying it's safe. And I believe that there's a complaint has been, or complaints are being made against the medical authorities in regards to that advice given to the general public. Anyway, there we go. So that's it. I hope you've learned something from that.
Thanks, Ray.
That's
Thank you.
fabulous, Ray. Ray, there's some questions in the chat if you wouldn't mind having a quick
Yep,
squeeze.
okay, I'll go through them quickly and see what I can do. Okay, so, all right, where do I start? Okay, so we'll go through. Okay, RF technology this is from Sarah. It's used in the aesthetics industry to blow up fat tissue, and there are court cases going in the US because people have had heart attacks through these treatments. So RF actually penetrates a lot further than 8 millimeters. That is correct. I'll just let you know, there's a lot more to it. ELF, extremely low frequencies, actually penetrates completely through you. The higher the frequency, the shorter the wave, the less penetrative it is. But magnetic fields go through everything. Don't for a minute think that the only thing that penetrates you is the electric field. That stops is the electric field. The magnetic field will go right through you. There is nothing at all that in the 5G technology that they're talking about that will stop a magnetic field from going through you. So just remember that. All right. So let's keep going. Let's see what else we've got. Thank you for the lovely words there. Okay. Okay, from Sarah again, does that mean EMs mean, what's an EMs? What do you mean by that? Electromagnetic sensitive, is that what you're talking about?
It's talking about elective members, I believe.
Yeah, and yeah, thanks. PSS is the public cell, the public internet you're referring to.
All right, the best way to explain this to everyone is that if I'm aware that a criminal offence is going to occur, or am I a party to a criminal offence if I either omit to do something or I do something in regards to that? The answer is normally yes. Okay, a criminal offence is a serious issue. There's no difference between a murder or manslaughter or assault. They're all serious offences. Okay, in the eyes of the law. Okay, so there's a thing called aiding and abetting. Okay, and anyone that's sort of associated with it, and when we talk about they should have done everything, exercised their due diligence, done everything in their control to try and stop it, then they might have a defence. But if they don't do anything, just sit on their hands, there's no defence. The other thing is, so technically, yes, anybody that's involved in allowing it, particularly if they're put on notice that it's going to assault someone and they do nothing about it, it's in their control or their power to do something about it and they do nothing, well, then technically that could be an aiding and abetting type arrangement. You'll also find that what else? We also could expose to a private process, what we call a misfeasance in public office tort. It's a special tort that's been designed for members of parliament and for people in public office who have used a thing called reckless indifference. So if they look at material and it's reasonably foreseeable that it's going to cause harm and they've acted outside of their duty, then they could be sued by a complainant or a plaintiff for misfeasance in public office. Does that assist? Is that okay? Okay. All right. Do these responsibilities apply to New South Wales? That applies pretty much to every councillor Australia-wide. You'll find that you have to get a lawyer to look at each individual scenario. I was just giving you a basic scenario of what South Australia is, but clearly each state's got a different laws, and it's just a matter of looking at them. But they're all very, very similar. Very, very similar. Okay. What are any other questions? Okay, that's it. What's the process to see if it's right to work with you from here? What's that mean? Okay, Sarah again.
I think that's a different Sarah. Sarah number 2, are you there?
Oh, can we work with you? Well, you already are, in a way. The trick is that the best way to explain it is that councillors are your friends, okay? Never, ever look at your councillors and the councillor is your enemy, because they're not. They're mums and dads They're human beings just like you and I. And the trick is just to educate them, just like I've done with you today, so as they actually understand and see it in the same light. And then hopefully they will start to, that's how it's worked, is by simply treating councillors and elected members as your friends, and they'll start to understand that there is a real problem. Okay, and that's really been the success to the whole thing, really. Okay. Okay, can we do a whole group legal action? Well, yes, in essence we could. Okay, you're talking about a class action here or a representative action. The thing is, each state has its own laws in regards to representative actions, that sort of thing. Yes, they can be done, but it's very hard. You have to prove injury, and everybody has to have evidence to indicate that they've got that. So if everyone's sort of put councils on notice or telcos on notice, those sorts of things, then that could possibly be established. Watch the case up in North Queensland. Once that comes down, what we're hoping is that the court will rule that telcos can be restrained, and that will literally open the floodgates for class actions in this country. And that's what we're waiting for. All right. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we can stop. We can talk personally now if you want. Just cop off mute and just ask me a simple question if you like. You haven't got time to type it up.
So Ray, we can't see you. Your video's off now. Is that?
Oh, my apologies. Sorry. Is that better? There we go. All right. Good. Okay. So I hope that's given everyone there's a lot there to sink in, but I think the main thing that you've picked from this would be that technically the electromagnetic radiation that the telcos are using actually touches you and penetrates your body, and that you have the right to withdraw your consent to that, and that's when the law applies, if that makes sense. Okay.
Hey, I've got a question.
Yes.
One of my co-counsellors has been watching this with me, and we were, Kenzie van den Euler, we were approached by a couple of our residents with concerns for their health over EMF, and Kenzie was involved with trying to stop a Telstra tower going up where she lives. And she and I are texting through this, and we know that we will want to all of our senior exec team and our EMs to see this presentation that you've provided. And with SEEN here, I'm wondering, and I'm just floating the question, is that once we get our guys, and particularly our public, our manager for public health and safety on board and our governance team, whether or not we might be able to do something specifically with our council in terms of specific legal advice that that is relevant to us, and particularly now with Kenzie and I having this knowledge that we could be liable, and therefore so is all of council. And I think, and I know I'm speaking on behalf of Kenzie, but she's probably thinking a similar thing to me.
Well, that's what happened at Chittering, and I'll just explain that to you. Yeah. What had happened is there was my legal advice. Now, you've got to understand, my legal advice was to my client. It wasn't to the council.
Yep.
My client passed that on to the council. And then there was a medical opinion, which is very detailed. I think that the medical opinion was, oh crikey, was about 30 pages long. And my advice was about 60 pages long. So they were very detailed advices. What had happened is I spoke to council. The council decided to, one of the councillors decided to put a resolution at the council meeting, even though it was an upgrade. Remember, it was just simply a 5G upgrade, so there was no development application approval needed or anything. But basically, what it was is that the issue was that a letter was sent to the telco saying that if you turn the tower on, we'll deem it to be a public nuisance, and therefore we'll then issue an abatement notice against you and proceed according to law. And that was a motion that was put at the council meeting. Basically, what it was at the council meeting was basically forcing the CEO to write the letter. So the council said, we just want you to simply write a letter to the telco, tell them to back off. No legal stuff was done, just a simple letter to the telco. Now, what had happened is is that, so here you've got the council laws and you've got the council. So there's two sides of the fence, all right? So the council has its own opinion as to how it should run the council, but so do the council laws. So my opinion is that the councillors rule the show. The CEO, etc., are just there to assist you in making decisions, etc. But sometimes it gets a bit skew-if. So what happened with the chittering issue is that the chittering got their own legal advice. They found that, yes, they can issue an abatement notice in regards to this, but the success was, there was not a high chance of success if they took that. So therefore, that was an excuse for the council then to revert back and say, well, we've got legal advice on the matter and we're not proceeding any further with an abatement issue. So those some of the things that can occur.
Right.
All right.
The issue I see is because the two residents that Kenzie and I met with, I had a little bit of a background in, the electromagnetic spectrum, and I was talking to Kenzie about that. So we got quite involved talking to them. The issue I see is if we wanted specifically your advice, because you're the expert in this area, we'd have to make sure there wasn't a conflict of interest, because one of the things I was thinking is because you have offered advice in terms of the letter that you said to send them to the town post, which I know that they've done. And they'll obviously be on board with what Kenzie and I were trying to do. But yeah, so this is where I see it might fall down if you're already acting on behalf of one of our residents for that.
Well, that's the issue. But I'd have to see if I'm acting for that resident. So if I'm acting for the resident, then clearly that's a conflict. Okay. Yeah, if they're thinking of doing litigation against the council, but if there's no conflict, then I guess that's what just needs to be, is to have a look at it and say, okay, there is no conflict, and then I can advise.
Thank you, Ray.
Okay. And I guess that's what it comes down to is, and the old thing in law is, I might not be right, neither would the advice that somebody else is getting might be right. So that's why we have court to determine if whoever's right and who's wrong. So, okay, so some councils say this is a federal issue and overrides councils. That's not correct at all. Sorry, Anya, but that's a bit of a yes. There's the Telecommunications Act. What we call low impact, high impact. Councils and states have sort of allowed the feds to sort of squeeze in a little bit. But when it comes to criminal law, the feds can't. It's unconstitutional for them to interfere with our criminal laws. That's purely in the state's prerogative. So that's why I do what I do. It completely circumvents anything to do with the Telecommunications Act, anything.
So, breaking up a bit right there. Can you repeat that last sentence, please?
Ray?
Yeah, we can't hear you, Ray. This always happens on a key word. Serious. Yes. Oh, now he's muted. Hang on. Oh, now he's gone. Oh, here he is back.
Sorry, it happens. It's the technology I've got. It just.
I think it's when you say a key word, I think they're listening in. It always happens.
It does. It's just a coincidence, but those things happen.
There's no such thing as a coincidence.
Ray, one of the biggest challenges is to get councillors to actually try and understand this stuff.
Exactly. That's the biggest problem.
They can wish you well, and they'll say, unfortunately, we have no say in this. I suggest you speak to your federal member.
Okay.
And then, so it's really just a matter of continually well, councils in my area and councillors just continually passing the buck. And so how do you, should it be that we write a letter saying these are the legal things we want you to act on our behalf? How do we go about trying to get them to at least engage with it?
Well, I suggest you go and get some, if you really want to do something, you can go and get some advice on it, on how to do it. How I do it, though, is I guess you put them in a position where every councillor is sent a copy of for some reason, my legal advice, is also sent a copy of the medical opinions. And it's really up to the individual councillor to read that and then work out for their own mind as where they sit. If that makes sense. And then usually what happens is after that's done, their councillors are a lot more conducive to having a little meeting and have a little chat. And usually having it through a public forum is a good idea. And before you know it, and you only need one councillor on a council to put a motion to the council and start sharing the information to get a council to agree. And that's been the trick. It's really been state members, federal members, waste of time, in my opinion. State members are great, okay? Federal members are great, but you really they've got to be really on board with you, and they're really bucking the system. But I found that the simplest way is to go to the grassroots side of Parliament, which is the councils. Councils are very, very powerful, in my opinion. Because all the development and the abatement issues and everything come down there. What can the states do? What can a state member of Parliament really do? Can they issue an abatement notice? Can they? Not really. There's the Environmental Protection Act, but a lot of the authority comes back to the councils, and that's where the real power lies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
it just doesn't make sense to them.
No, sometimes councils need to understand that councillors have a lot of responsibility and a lot of power, and they can make a lot of change if they all stand united. And sometimes, a lot of the times, we've had opposition from the CEO and the executive side of the council, and there's been ways in which the councillors have been able to override the CEO's opinions and stuff like that. And that's how it's worked. Yeah, it's been great, actually.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Right.
Anyone else? Did I go over time, Inga, or was that?
Oh, just a little bit, but that's fine because it was really, really informative, and I think everyone has got a really good information. I guess it sort of opens up more questions. So what I'll do now, just to close off, I'll pass over to Shay, and she's just got a few words to say.
Alrighty, thank you, Angus. So yes, I am Shay. Sorry, I am Scene Secretary and Public Relations Officer. On behalf of the Scene Committee, I'd like to thank you all for attending this meeting. Please feel free to contact us. Our website is www.scene.org.au. Yep, there's our email address as well. It's sceneinaction@protonmail.com. So yeah, in an effort to promote a greater sense of community autonomy, I'd like to encourage our elected representatives to open up a dialogue about the limitations of the Telecommunications Act so that communities can address these areas of concern, and so that elected members can further support their constituents. And the Scene Committee, we are more than happy to be of assistance. Frequently asked questions and a recording of this meeting will be emailed to all attendees and other councillors that could not attend. So thank you so much for your time, Ray, and everyone else for attending. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good luck. Thank you.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.